They say some towns never escape their names. For Snowtown, South Australia, that name was sealed in steel. A quiet main street, a bank long abandoned, and inside its vault barrels, heavy and corroded. What they contained would unravel a nightmare and turn a farming town into the permanent epicenter of Australia's darkest case.
This is Fireside Tales.
Snowtown wasn't supposed to be famous. It was a dot on the map, a place you'd pass through on the way somewhere else. But between 1992 and 1999, 12 people vanished. At first, no one linked the disappearances. No one wanted to believe the pattern. Until investigators opened that vault and discovered what had been hidden away for years. Snowtown sat quietly beyond Adelaide's northern edge. Wheat fields, a post office, a handful of shops, nothing remarkable. That was the hook, because ordinary places don't prepare you for extraordinary shadows. By the early 90s, people in Adelaide's suburbs had already begun to vanish. Sometimes an explanation was offered. Someone had moved away, someone had cut ties with family, welfare checks still arrived, bank accounts still showed activity. But neighbours noticed empty houses, unanswered phones, voices gone silent. At the centre of it, though no one knew at first, were three men: John Bunting, Robert Wagner, and their circle of accomplices. They didn't strike at random. They targeted people they knew, men and women they saw as vulnerable. Some victims were chosen because they were different, some because they were disliked. The men told themselves stories of cleansing, of punishing those they despised, but underneath it was control. It was cruelty hidden behind closed doors. And for years no one connected the dots. The disappearances stayed scattered. Until one spring in 1999, when police followed a lead to a bank building in Snowtown. The vault was still there, heavy, cold steel, and behind it something no one could forget. Investigators entered the vault expecting paperwork, maybe stolen goods. What they found instead was suffocating. The air was thick, chemical, wrong. Inside stood 8 barrels, sealed with lids, heavy enough to strain the floor beneath them. When they were opened, the truth spilled out. Human remains, some dissolved in acid, stacked away in silence. Forensic teams began the long process of identifying who had been hidden inside. One by one, names returned: brothers, friends, acquaintances, people whose bank accounts had been mysteriously active long after they'd stopped answering their doors. It was then that police realised how bold those responsible had been. Withdrawals made from ATMs in plain daylight, neighbours answering phones and the voices of the missing. The illusion stretched out for years until it snapped. Locals in Snowtown remember the sudden change. One morning the town was quiet. The next, reporters swarmed the single main street. Vans with satellite dishes crowded outside the bank. Journalists calling it the Snowtown case before anyone inside the town could breathe. Some begged for the name to be separated from the crime, but the label stuck, as labels do. And in the midst of all the noise, there were smaller, stranger moments. A neighbour who claimed he'd seen John Bunting cleaning tools in his shed at midnight, humming softly to himself. A woman who dialed her brother's number every birthday, only to hear a calm stranger's voice on the other end, insisting he was fine, when in truth he hadn't been fine in years. The barrels themselves became the image that froze Australia in shock. Ordinary industrial drums, the kind you'd see in factories or farms, now forever linked to tragedy. The police sealed them away, but the word alone was enough. Barrels, that's all it took, and people understood. And as more names surfaced, so did the realization. These weren't strangers, stalked in the dark. They were people chosen from inside circles of trust. The house next door, the friend across the street. That was the detail that broke the country's sense of safety. Why did Snowtown's story linger? Not just because of its scale, 12 lives lost, but because of how ordinary it seemed. The men who carried it out didn't hide in shadows. They lived in the same suburbs as everyone else. They walked dogs, drank tea, mowed lawns. That was the horror, cruelty without disguise. And the barrels, steel, sealed, unforgiving, became an image that no one could look away from. They turned an unremarkable rural town into a shorthand for fear. Even today, decades later, mention Snowtown and people picture those barrels before anything else. The trials that followed were long. John Bunting and Robert Wagner were sentenced to life without release. Others who had taken part or looked away were imprisoned too. But the town never quite healed. Taxi drivers still avoid it after dark. Letters still arrive addressed simply to The town with the barrels. Snowtown became legend because it asked a question no one once answered. How close could cruelty be? Sometimes right next door, sometimes in plain sight. So if you ever find yourself driving through South Australia's back roads and you see a town that looks quiet, unremarkable, remember what was found sealed behind that vault door. Remember how ordinary the streets looked, even as something unthinkable rested at the centre. Thanks for staying by the fire, and remember, I see you.
Good night from Fireside Tales. Like and subscribe.